there are tons of well-known platformers, most of which you can probably remember from most indie titles and of course Nintendo. When most people tend to think of a platform game by Capcom, most people tend to think Ghosts and Goblins or Mega Man. However, there is another platformer people tend to forget about and, surprisingly enough, don't talk about anymore. I'm of course referring to Viewtiful Joe. This will be a 3-part video talking about the in-depth look of the Viewtiful Joe games. So where to start off in the beginning with the first title of the series, Viewtiful Joe. So let's henshin' a go-go, baby! Viewtiful Joe released on June 23rd of 2003. Even though the game is licensed by Capcom, most of the ideas came from a company known as Clover Studios. More specifically, Team Viewtiful, led by the game's creator, Hideki Kamiya. If you know who that guy is, I'm gonna save that to the very end, but let's just say he had a lot of crazy, over-the-top ideas. And one of his earliest ones was Viewtiful Joe. You'll probably see what I mean when I talk about the game itself. The game actually begins with Joe and Sylvia going on a date at a movie theater and seeing these old films of a hero known as Captain Blue. The movie ends with Captain Blue defeated, however the film comes to life and kidnaps Sylvia. However, with Captain Blue defeated, it's up to Joe to save the day, as his new hero form is created in Movieland, the place that this place takes place, known as Viewtiful Joe, and must take down the evil that is the Jeddo Empire, as they have an evil plan to use Sylvia to get to the human world and take it over. The reason I'm explaining this to you right now is because, well, in all honesty, they don't really go into much detail of it throughout the beginning of the game, but they do hint towards it throughout some small interactions with other characters. So let's begin with the first level of the game, Episode 1, Joe the Hero, which is definitely a tutorial world and is based off the classic Dracula films of the old 1960s. The tutorial itself is actually given to you by the spirit of Captain Blue and shows you what you're supposed to do in the game. Now, the best way I can describe Viewtiful Joe, it's a combination of a platformer mixed with a beat-em-up. Two different things that Capcom are actually well known for back in the 80s. With their tough-as-nails difficulty with games like Ghosts and Goblins and Mega Man, and the beat-em-up genre that Mike Hagger's from, which I don't remember. You don't really attack with the B button, you actually use the X and Y button to either punch or kick. But you can also angle them with the controls. A obviously is jumping, however you also learn some new techniques that involve something known as VFX energy, which allows Joe to use the power of film itself. By pressing the L button, you'll be allowed to slow time and allowed to do some really cool action sequences. This one is very useful. While pressing the R button will actually speed up your attacks in time. It's more useful for other situations, and I don't really use it that much for combat. And lastly, which you learn in Episode 2, Some Like It Red Hot, is the close-up attack, which gives your powers a boost of energy by giving you an up-close personal attack that allows for massive combos. However, Episode 1 doesn't give you the close-up attack, and you don't learn fast forward until later in the first level, so you're kinda used to only using the slow ability. However, my biggest problem with this tutorial is, well, I started off with the only two difficulties you can get with the game. Kids and adults, and I started with adults first, and... yeah, I totally suck at this. So I went to kids mode for the entire playthrough, because let's be honest, I am not good at these types of games. Though I will generally say there is a big problem with the game I have, and that is the fact that it does not teach you how to handle certain situations. It's basically a learning curve that a lot of old NES games had back in the day. At least give me a hint how to handle the big giant chopper, because seriously, I died like 10 times to this guy. And that was mostly in adult mode. At least with kids mode, I had a less of a hard time. Fun fact, since I played in adult mode, I was on the verge of rage quitting the game because I thought it was just borderline unfair. But it's just not good at handling certain situations on how to beat certain enemies. It wanted to definitely emphasize Mega Man, and it managed to succeed. After making it to the final act of the first level, as most levels are broken into different acts, you face your first real boss in the game, a vampire monster known as Charles III. He isn't as difficult as the helicopter in my honest opinion, but it is still a good first boss. Just don't ever do the helicopter ever again. Episode 2's theme is definitely more city-based, emphasizing not just one type of movie, but a multitude of them, such as Getaway Bus, just like that movie, I believe it's called Speed, and the boss, one of my favorite characters personality-wise, Hulk Davison, is definitely an inspiration from biker films, or possibly The Warriors. After defeating Hulk Davidson, you enter Episode 3, 2 Million Leagues Under the Sea, which is a homage to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, even though it's more inspired by Jaws movie. This is probably the worst chapter in the game if you want my honest opinion, because the water movements make Joe even slower, and when you have to do the slow ability, it makes Joe even slower, if that's a word. Probably not. I mean, there are not really that many good water levels. The water temple is a really good example of this, but I think this sucks because Joe's movements are pushed to a halt. I've seen turtles and snails and my old internet move faster than this. And plus, it's not helped with one of the most annoying bosses in the game, but not the worst boss in the game. I have nothing against Grand Bruce other than the fact that he has probably the worst mechanics in all the games, as he has a lock-on shooing ability that takes 2 hearts from you, and the fact if you leave him alone too long, he'll start healing himself. Whoever thought that was a good idea for a mechanic should buzz off. And the levels don't really get that much more enjoyable either. Episode 4 is probably a good example, the Viewtiful Escape. Definitely one of the most annoying ones, as you have to always dodge this giant missile, and I think you're supposed to use this platform to get around the situation, but in all honesty, I just damaged right through it, so I didn't want to bother with it. It took me 30 minutes to get through this level. Plus, it's also dealt with in Joe Imposter. He's not as annoying, but he does have an attack that takes out massive chunks of your health, and it's a good thing I'm playing kids mode, or else I would be getting game overs way too many times. Still, he's not that bad of a boss, but it takes a lot of trial and error. And also a crap ton of points in specific attacks you should get. Which I probably should mention before we continue on is that every time you do a specific level, or do a specific part of a mission and to navigate through each act, you're given a specific score to how you did well in the missions. I wasn't doing very well, as I usually got B's and A's, and sometimes lucked out on a V, especially in the beginning because I died so many times on the first level. I've gotten Viewtiful so many times. These points go into a currency, which you can actually go to a shop, so you can actually buy specific items such as more 1-ups, more health, extra health pickups, and new abilities like the Red Hot Kick. Or even one of my favorites, the extra power of VX energy, because trust me, that's very useful when you keep using the slow ability. I didn't get every power up, but there are also some special limited items such as the boomerang and also the pink bomb, but I didn't think these power ups through, and you know, I'm an idiot. And after defeating Imposter Joe, he actually turns into a new form, which is a black demon-like version of Joe, which becomes part of episode 5, the Midnight Thunder Boy. Which is actually a pretty short level, but it's probably my favorite because it features the best character in Viewtiful Joe, which is Joe's newest rival, AngelStar. Don't deny it, this guy's badass, and I don't mean it like an edgelord way. He actually has like a very hilarious personality. He even goes over what the Jeddo Empire is planning on doing with Sylvia by literally reading the script. That is actually really funny. And unlike the other bosses like Imposter Joe or Grand Bruce, AngelStar has a really good fight if you know what you're doing. And considering how much I've gotten used to the controls, I think I got a good idea of how to handle AngelStar. And I did, and after defeating him, he tells you that you had some very beautiful moves, which was the origin of Viewtiful Joe's name. And then AngelStar disappears for the rest of the game. Even AngelStar isn't happy about that. Oh well, there's still the sequel. Moving on to episode 6, The Magnificent 5, and yeah, this definitely emphasizes what makes it a Mega Man-like platformer. It's a f***ing boss rush. This time around, you're actually facing all the bosses of the Jeddo Empire again, well, excluding AngelStar, but they do have more power in their attacks and more health. But considering how I knew how to handle most of these bosses, my real honest problem was I actually had a hard time with Hulk Davidson, yet everyone else I handled pretty easily. Even Grand Bruce and Imposter Joe. We find Sylvia, and he's being held by the leader of the Jeddo Empire, or sort of, Fire Leo, and he is the worst boss in the game. I've actually seen speedruns of the game, and even Fire Leo is annoying for the speedrunners or community. Because for starters, he has this fire-based body, and the only way to actually handle him, because they never tell you this, is you're supposed to be in speed mode and catch yourself on fire so you can hit him. There's a fire pit that always has platforms that disappear and reappear because they're sinking into the lava. And then he has a spinning move that's always annoying to dodge, and the only way for you to actually hit him is by dodging his attack so he can get stunned, so you can use his special combo attacks to start doing damage. It becomes a slog to sit through. Plus, if you don't know what you're doing, you are going to lose a life instantaneously like I did. Fire Leo was one of the most frustrating bosses I had to deal with in this game because it was just borderline annoying. There's just so much. However, after defeating Fire Leo, Sylvia gets captured again, and this time you're led to the true final episode of the game, Joe and Sylvia. It's definitely a gauntlet that definitely shows how to test your true skills, facing all the types of enemies and platforming skills that you've learned along the way, and then you finally get to face off against the main antagonist, which is Captain Blue? Captain Blue is the bad guy. Who didn't see that coming, except probably everyone? Though, joking aside, it actually is a good plot twist. And I will generally say the final boss fight is tough, but it's the right amount of tough that if you don't have the right moves to use, you can't really beat King Blue. Also, it's a mech fight on the planet Earth. And then after the mechs get defeated, you actually fight Captain Blue again, just like you did in episode 1. It's actually a really poetic homage to the beginning of the game. I think that's actually really clever. After defeating Captain Blue, he also reveals to be Sylvia's father? Well, you can't do a movie homage without a Star Wars reference. And it turns out Captain Blue was actually a famous director who starred in his own films. His movies sadly aged poorly, so he left for Movieland to relive his old movie days. However, Captain Blue warns that there will be 2 more threats attacking the Earth. And speak of the devil, threat number 2 is coming up. The game also ends with Sylvia also getting a V-Watch and becoming a beautiful warrior herself, hinting towards a sequel. And then after the credits roll, there's a very funny bonus ending that looks like a music video with the characters. You know, just like that one music video series that Rebel Taxi was talking about. All honesty, I thought that was really funny. However, since I played it on kids mode and I am playing the GameCube version, I don't really unlock anything. However, if this is the PlayStation 2 version, which came out much later, you actually get to play as Dante from Devil May Cry. And that is a really cool reward. But for the GameCube version, if you beat the game on adult mode, you'll unlock Sylvia and a new mode known as V-rated mode. And if you finish V-rated mode, you'll also be able to play as Alistair, and then unlock the most hardest difficulty in the game, Ultra V-rated mode. And after beating that mode, you'll unlock Captain Blue as a playable character, and nothing else. The game definitely emphasizes that you play the game entirely again to get more rewards, and after playing in adults mode, not even being able to beat the first act of the first level, yeah, I'm not doing that again. However, it does give the game a lot of replayability, and I generally think that's a good thing. For people who are more experts in beat-em-up platformers, which I don't think is actually a thing. Viewtiful Joe is a good game, but there are issues with the game, such as not perfectly describing how to handle bosses or how to obtain background items. Yeah, I have no idea why there are items in the background, and I have no idea how to get them. But the gameplay and the replayability comes from how you can improve your combos and attacks, and to get those shining V ratings. You can play the game again in adult mode and the other harder difficulties, but if you've already played kids mode, you've already seen what you can do in this game. The game just adds a little more difficulty with the characters as well as the damage output, also draining your VFX energy to less than it should be, so you have to be very smart on how to use it. And with that, that was the first Viewtiful Joe game. Not the perfect game, but it's still not bad. It's definitely a game I think I would recommend to people who want 100% games and want to improve their skills in combo-based attacks. But that's all for now for Viewtiful Joe. See you on my channel again when we talk about its sequel, Viewtiful Joe 2. So until then, henshin a go-go, baby! You know, this is the part of the video where I show you what happened last video, but the game actually did that for me. So, take it away, Alistair.
You want to know who I am? Go to your nearest discount store and get a copy of Viewtiful Joe. Go! Now!
And with that, let's continue on talking about Viewtiful Joe 2. Viewtiful Joe came out on November 18th, 2004 on the Nintendo GameCube, and on December 8th on the PlayStation 2. As like the previous game in the series, this is licensed by Capcom, made by Clover Studios, made possible by Team Viewtiful, and directed by Hideki Kamiya, who was known for, at the time, Okami and the Devil May Cry series, hence why Dante was playable in the last game. Though once when the game came out, people were really mixed on the sequel. Just saying a lot considering the first game is good, but it has some noteworthy problems. I guess we'll have to figure that out once when we actually look at the game. The game begins literally right after the first Viewtiful Joe game. you see Captain Blue, Viewtiful Joe, and Sylvia actually see the new threat of the series, and I'm not kidding when I say this, they're called the Ghetto Empire. I'm not joking, that's actually their name, and they're led by the Black Emperor and his Ghetto Force. They capture Captain Blue and turn him into a Blue Oscar, one of the 7 rainbow Oscars that's hidden within different films in movie land. He's also after something called the Black Film. And it's up to Joe and Sylvia to rescue Captain Blue, get all the rainbow Oscars, and destroy the Black Film before the Ghetto Force obtains them and takes over movie land and the human world. Just like what Captain Blue was originally planning. And let's begin with the first level of the game. Though I kind of ignored a lot of different things in the first video, mostly because I can actually throw a lot of them in the second video, in all honesty. Such as the worlds in the first game being called demos, this one's actually called reels. So our first reel of the day is 10 million years BC, which takes place in Dinoland, which is inspired by, of course, Jurassic Park. Starting it again how the first game did, Joe and Sylvia crash landing in Movie Land, or a different part of it, with Sylvia getting a new look and properly explaining why.
Sylvia, when the heck did you change your clothes?
Are you kidding? This is the movies. You can do anything you want. Why don't you give it a whirl?
You don't have to tell me. Go, Fat Hat! Shazam!
Now, the gameplay for Viewtiful Joe, ironically enough, even how it's structured, is 110% the same. Even how they lay out certain abilities. So basically, punch, kick, jump. You eventually learn the ability slow, mach speed, and zoom, and you make crazy over-the-top combos with each attack, which I will generally say is pretty badass. However, this time around, instead of being an unlockable character, you also get to play as Sylvia throughout the main game. By pressing the Z button, you'll be able to switch between Joe and Sylvia. And Sylvia does technically play the same. Instead of punches, she actually has now a Viewtiful Blaster, which shoots hearts if you actually do it in slow-mo. And I generally think Sylvia is a better character to use, especially for rookie characters like myself. Because if you keep using her punching ability to get long distance enemy, you can get some massive combos and get little to no damage. And just like Joe, she can also use slow and she can also use zoom, but instead of mach speed, she uses an ability called replay. By holding the R button, you'll enter a recording mode, and if you either do punches, kicks, or even do the zoom attacks, it'll record the attack and do 3 powerful hits on the foe, or certain types of platforms. And if you do these with combos, it can be quite devastating. Just be careful, because if you actually get hit while in record mode, you'll also get 3 times the amount of damage. Just like in the last game, which I didn't really go into detail about, sorry. Every level is structured within certain type of situations, like you have to beat certain enemies, do certain platformings, do this in a certain amount of time, and each of the levels are mandatory for certain characters, so you have to remember which character to use for certain situations. Getting through the first world, as per usual, definitely emphasizes how to use the game, though you actually get all of Joe's abilities within the first world, and over time in the second reel, which I'll go much later, you'll actually unlock Sylvia's attacks. Most of the reels in the first game were usually broken down to roughly 4 to 5 acts. Though in Viewtiful Joe 2, they've actually been shortened or lengthened depending on what levels you're in. Roughly though, you usually get around 3 to 5 depending on which situation you're going to end up in. And Act 3 of course is normally the boss fight, with our first boss being one of my personal favorite members of the Ghetto Force, Drill Sergeant Big John the T-Rex. And trust me when I say, this won't be the last time I mention him. Even though for the first boss of the game, he is a little on the tricky side, but that's mostly because I was kind of saving up my V points so I can use VFXX power, because just like after every act is completed, you always go to the shop right after and go to a save point. Though instead of actually going to the next level, you can also choose which character you could play as before the level begins. So it can be Joe must go on or Sylvia must go on. So it at least gives you variety on who to choose, and it even gives you hints on how to deal with certain enemies, something I very much needed for certain situations. Though it's never really explained how to unlock certain hints, and I've looked around the internet to find how these hints are unlocked, but no dice. It might have to do with level progression, constantly dying, or even my scores at the end of the level. And of course, you also unlock new abilities that are useful for both Joe and Sylvia. I tend to buy the most expensive ones first, and if I have any left over, I usually go for the cheap stuff. It's probably the wrong way to do it, but that's how I do it normally. After defeating John, you actually get the first Rainbow Oscar, and you're also introduced to a new character of the series, Joe's dad, Jet. who happens to be the owner of the theater that literally started all of this. Which kind of makes Joe a bit of a cheapskate because he went to a movie theater that his dad owns for a date. Don't know how to feel about that yet. Another thing I should probably also mention is that usually at the end of every episode, there's always like a fun little gag. Like the narrator always says something serious about certain situations. Joe and Sylvia always have some fun little banter, so you actually see a little bit of their relationship as they definitely know their flaws, but they still like each other, and I think that's kind of cute. Sorry if I didn't mention this also in the last review. However, unlike in the last game where all the areas of Movie Land are all inspired by the Captain Blue films, which are also inspired by tons of classical films, Jet's purpose is actually switching films so Joe and Sylvia can actually go find the Rainbow Oscars, as they're found in different movies, but it's never properly explained how they're interconnected with Movie Land. My personal guess is probably fast travel. Now, moving on to Reel 2, Viewtiful Heroes and the Statue of Doom. Clearly an inspiration of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which some people generally say is the best Indiana Jones movie, but aren't most of them good? With the exception of the last one. And yeah, you can generally see the inspiration for the temple adventuring, and there's also a minecart level where you have to face John again, of all things. See, I told you it wouldn't be the last time we talk about John. And eventually, once you get to the center of the temple, where you find the second Rainbow Oscar, you're also met with another member of the Ghetto Force, and also the Guardian of the Temple, Ancient Guardian Flinty Stone, who's probably an Insomniac, but he's also a stone, so I don't know how that works. His boss fight's actually pretty entertaining, and it also gives you a lot of strategy, mostly because I think the controls are a little more clearer in the second game than they are in the first one. It also might be because, since playing the first game, I've gotten used to the controls of the sequel, and as per usual, you go to the next reel, you see a lot of the interaction between Joe, Sylvia, and Jet, and we're also introduced to Reel 3, Memoir of an Invisible Monster, which is inspired by Memoirs of an Invisible Man, which is surprising since I'm a major movie person. I've never actually heard of this movie before. It could have been also would have been the inspiration for the modern film Invisible Man, which is a great horror film. Funnily enough, I don't really remember much from this level, except for the fact it takes place in a futuristic city, you go into a factory. There is this annoying safe mission, and that when you unlock, you also run into John Blart Dino Cop. I know that's not his legal name at the moment, but I had to throw in a Paul Blart joke there somewhere, because somebody thought that was good cinema. However, you find yourself in the main laboratory, you're also met with one of the Ghetto Force's head scientists, Dr. Crankin. Not to get him confused with Captain Kraken from Power Stone. By the way, Capcom, make another Power Stone. And we're also introduced to his Cyber Phantom Camo Leon. Get it? It's like chameleon. And in all honesty, this boss is a royal joke. He is super easy to beat in my honest opinion, as you just easily dodge his tongue, he tends to turn invisible, reappears. Also, Dr. Crankin always throws food at him, but if you know which wall he's jumping to, you can literally even get the food for yourself. So he's clearly the easiest boss in the game, and I had no trouble with him. In fact, I hardly had any trouble with the game at all. I died a few times, but I only got like a game over at the end of the game, and I'll explain why once we get there. First, let's talk about Reel 4. Thunderboy Lives Twice. Though it is inspired by James Bond's film You Only Live Twice, the world setting is actually inspired by samurai movies, which is kind of funny considering that's the closest thing we have to a Japanese reference in this entire game, with the exception that Viewtiful Joe is technically inspired by Japanese Super Sentai. You know, the Power Rangers. But hey, I love myself some good classic samurai films, so I ain't complaining. Tons of interesting missions like destroying a Buddha. There's this annoying fire mission where you have to kill a UFO, but it's always so hard to hit him, and he always sets the place on fire. And once when you get to the boss fight, you actually run into John again as a samurai, but you don't fight him. If you can take a guess from the name Thunderboy, that's right, Alistair's back, baby. And the clip that was part of the beginning of this video actually came from this part. So you fight Alistair yet again, and after defeating him the first time, it's revealed that he actually found the Dark Film, and it's taking over him, turning him into Underworld Emperor Alistair. And you have to fight his Emperor mode. And yeah, again, Alistair is still my favorite character, probably one of my favorite bosses, even though I was getting my ass kicked a few times. But when it comes to Viewtiful Joe, I'm kind of used to that by now. After defeating Alistair, you get yet again another Rainbow Oscar, and Alistair yet again gets the boot. Though there is this fun interaction with Alistair and Joe's dad, Jet.
Hey, wait a minute. Is my part over already? No way. This can't be. Hey, you, put a word in for me, will ya?
Huh? Me? Yeah, sure. But first, let's get the next film rolling. Any preference?
No! Come on, help a brother out! I'm packing heat!
Maybe someday, Alistair, you'll get your time in the limelight. Oh wait, yeah, there's one more video after this. Then we move into Level 5 Ice Edge, inspired by the Ice Age series, but I'm not entirely certain it's based off the Blue Sky Studios Ice Age, though there are plenty of other movies that involve the Arctic. I just can't think of a lot of them on the top of my head. Oh wait, The Thing! Oh yeah, and this is the worst world in the game! As for most ice levels, ice physics are a pain in the ass. And it's not helped with the fact there's an ice cave with this weird ice wall mission that I swear to God, I have no idea how to break fully, and I got lucky during that last part of it. I always kept slipping, sliding, getting my butt kicked. And of course there's also the 6 machine mission, which I forget to mention in the last video because the 6 machine doesn't really impact most of the game with the exception of some segments and the very end of the game. Though this time around, the 6 machine has been upgraded to a submarine when you're playing as Joe, but if you're Sylvia, it is a drill. So you have to remember to be switching to Joe to Sylvia depending on certain situations, because for some stupid reason, the drill can't jump. So you have to strategize which character to use for certain situations. And I like shoot 'em ups like Galaga and those crazy over-the-top ones from Japan, but this one just kinda sucks. And lastly, Frost Tiger. Another member of the Ghetto Force, and turns out to be Fire Leo's brother. So, you know how I said Fire Leo is the worst boss in Viewtiful Joe? Imagine making Fire Leo but worse. I genuinely have no idea how to handle Frost Tiger. I kid you not, I usually just spam Sylvia's blaster for certain attacks, and when he goes full circle, he was just borderline annoying to handle. At least with Fire Leo, I knew how to handle certain situations, but with Frost Tiger, I had to dodge his attacks, make sure to go into my full-powered zoom slow-mo, and then hit him like there's no tomorrow. But I beat him, I got the next Rainbow Oscar, there are 2 Sylvias. Wait, there are 2 Sylvias? Oh great, a Sylvia imposter. Which leads us to Reel 6, Do Robots Dream of Romantic Scene, which is inspired not by a movie, but a book called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. Now, why reference a book? Well, that's because this is the book that inspired the film Blade Runner, which was, yeah, a good movie. And just as I said before, being exactly like the last game, you can take a guess what Reel 6 is all about. It's another boss rush. Though not as bad, there is just generally one problem. It's revealed that the imposter Sylvia is actually the serial killer android Miss Bloody Rachel, made by Dr. Crankin, take the form of anything she truly desires, and even copies their abilities. Which is, I think, a clever way of doing a boss rush. You're not facing the same guys again, you're actually facing Rachel in a more difficult version of the bosses you've faced prior, the Ghetto Force. So of course, starting this automatically with a John reference. Though, just like in the last game, there is no boss fight against Alistair, meaning that boss number 4 is Frost Tiger. No. Throughout most of the boss fight, Rachel actually starts growing emotions. She gets the idea of what it is to have a human heart, and actually becomes kind of a nice person when you get to know her. But Dr. Cranky ain't having that shit, and tries to destroy her. So as for our final fight, we face Dr. Crankin, and after turning him into calamari, Rachel becomes an ally, and the Oscars they've collected are given to Joe's dad, Jet. Doesn't sound like a bad idea, right? With 6 of the 7 Oscars, all that's left is to take down the Ghetto Empire and save Captain Blue in the final episode, Starship Beauties, which is inspired by the film Starship Troopers. It's the final showdown at the Ghetto home base, featuring the toughest obstacles the game has to offer, such as the strongest enemies, such as a 4-legged alien robot dog, gotta throw in an alien reference there somewhere, a gauntlet of platforming missions, including a tough button-hitting mission that I generally suck at, and one more fight against a lot of the machine-based weaponry, such as planes, which I generally hated in the first game, but I think the airplanes are a little more better and even cooler when they have mech forms. Tanks, which I kind of forget to mention, which I generally hated at first, but once when you get the idea of how to handle them, they're actually just a cakewalk. And the most powerful version of John, with his little baby Johns that breathe fire and explode. By far the toughest John in the game, and probably the best John in the game. Though then again, the Samurai John was also pretty cool. I would have actually liked a boss fight against him. After surviving the gauntlet, you come face to face with the leader of the Ghetto Force, Black. and he happens to have the black film, which in episode 5 was actually destroyed. How? Well, you'll find out later as we have to face Dark Kaiser, the giant mechanized version of the final boss, just like in the last game when we fought King Blue, the mechanized Captain Blue. There is a lot of copy-pasting in this, and I can kinda see why people thought the sequel was an inferior version. Then again, it is just playing the same game with a few improvements, and that's what I think sequels should do. Improve what they did last time. And this leads us to a battle in our giant mech known as 6-6, which turns into giant robot versions of Joe and or Sylvia, depending on who you want to play as. And of course, the boss is on a universal scale, with him literally on the sun and you punching planets. And it's not really clear how to beat him, but apparently you have to hit the purple core in his body when he does certain attacks. Hey, I managed to succeed, so it can't be that hard. You just gotta remember which character is useful. Most of the time it's Sylvia. And it's revealed that Black is actually Jet. There goes another Star Wars reference. Actually, this one makes more sense. And now that he has all the rainbow Oscars, he becomes Jet Black, even though he's white, sending himself, Joe, and Sylvia into the real world during an award show, which is ironically called the Viewtiful Award. So meta. Though Jet Black might have his full power, Joe and Sylvia actually have no VFX energy in the real world. And this is the part of the game I got the most game overs, as most of the game I have played through a kids mode and didn't really die until this part, because I will generally say, this final boss, Jet Black, is absurdly cheap. You have to hit Jet Black a few times and not get hit because you take double damage. And with the power of viewership, just like what you can do if you like and subscribe, Joe and Sylvia get their powers back. And just note, every time you die, you have to start the fight over again when you don't have VFX energy. So if you're a magnet to bullets, like I apparently am, you could normally start the fight with little to no health or even half your health. And trust me, it got fairly annoying and frustrating. But with enough perseveration, I managed to beat him. And after Jet is defeated, Blue's back to normal, and Jet explains what happened. Well, actually, it's Blue. We basically get his backstory. As mentioned before, Jet actually owns the movie theater, and has been great friends with Blue since Joe and Sylvia were little kids. However, after finding the black film deep in a garage, he became evil, I guess. But in truth, he wanted to show a film for Joe to become a great hero to inspire, eventually getting over-possessive and wanting to become the hero himself. And in hindsight, this also gives a good idea of how Joe and Sylvia's relationship even began. And I kinda like that. They've been lifelong friends that eventually became a couple. Jet turns good, the day is saved, and nope! Threat number 3 and the last threat of the Viewtiful Joe series appears, who happens to be the originator of the black film. So, Joe and family fly into space to find and defeat the last foe of the Viewtiful Joe series. But they never do. And I'll explain in the last video I'm going to be talking about. Though once when the credits play, you actually get to see some really funny bloopers from the voice actors, probably in both the Japanese and the English version, which is as enjoyable as the music video at the end of the last game. And what's really cool is, once when you beat the game, you can also play it again in a newer difficulty. What I mean is, you can play the game from beginning with all your stuff, and move it to Adults mode, and of course, you can also unlock V-rated and Ultra V-rated mode, but you can keep all the stuff you've had from the beginning of the game, which is something I really wanted in the last one. I didn't want to start a new save state and be incredibly weak in having to handle certain situations. But that's kinda all you unlock, with the exception of some really cool little symbols on your save file. You don't even unlock Dante in the PlayStation 2 version, and you can't even play as Alistair or Jet Black or Captain Blue, which is sad, my honest opinion. You do, however, have the 36 chambers, which is a tough as nails mission mode that I didn't even beat the first mission, and they're not really worth anything for an endgame reward other than, well, you know, bragging rights. Which is a shame because, unlike the last game, I actually would have wanted to play Adult mode in Viewtiful Joe 2. But Viewtiful Joe 1 succeeds in the replayability because you're rewarded for playing tougher difficulties. Viewtiful Joe 2, you only play the hard modes just because you want to, which is generally a shame. And I think that's probably why people don't really talk about Viewtiful Joe 2. I mean, it is a sequel that improves upon the issues I had with the first game, and made the same mistakes. In the end, Joe 2 is a sequel that's worth playing once, and you don't really need to play it again. I mean, I really like Viewtiful Joe 2. I had a really fun time than I did with the first game. I'll still say Joe 2 is my favorite gameplay-wise and adventure-wise, but when it comes to the content, Viewtiful Joe 1 is definitely the winner. And this will be the last time Team Viewtiful actually will be seen in the Viewtiful Joe line of games. What do I mean? Because, well, the third and last video I'll be talking about is actually 2 side games. And I'm just gonna not spoil it from there because, well, tune in next time when we talk about the final part of the Viewtiful Joe series, the spin-offs. And until then, henshin a go-go, baby! As you can take a guess from this video, this is a third and the final part of the Viewtiful Joe trilogy, even though this is technically about 2 other games. So if you haven't seen these videos, I recommend checking those out before looking into this. So let's henshin a go-go one last time. Let's start off by not really talking about the games, but the other appearances Joe has made in other sources of media. Joe has had quite a few cameos since his appearance in his own original games, whether it be quotations in games like Okami or Bayonetta, or unique references like in The Wonderful 101, or as a costume in Dead Rising 4 and Street Fighter V. He's also made playable appearances in fighting games like Marvel vs. Capcom 3, as well as Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, which in all honesty, that kind of makes sense if you think about it. He's also playable in mobile games such as Puzzle Fighter and a game called Combat Crew. And before you ask, no, I've never heard of that game, and I don't really plan on playing it either. And lastly, I should mention the Viewtiful Joe anime. Yeah, that's right, Joe had an anime of all video game series. Though the anime itself is a retelling of both the first 2 games, with the first half being about the first game and the second half being about the second game. Though surprisingly enough, we actually got only Season 1 in America because, take a guess, dubbed by 4Kids. It also had some interesting episodic stories developing more of the world and the characters, and even adding some new original characters to the series like Captain Blue Jr. and the ever-lovely Sprocket. I haven't really watched the anime, I just know it exists, so that could be its own video in the future someday, if I can actually find the complete series. And yeah, that's basically all the other appearances Joe has made outside of his own franchise. I had to talk about the anime first, mostly because, well, the first game I'm going to be looking at is actually a spin-off that is part of the anime universe, not the original games. And that is Viewtiful Joe Red Hot Rumble. Of course, I'll be playing the Nintendo GameCube version, and this was of course made by Capcom and Clover Studios, and released on September 29th in 2005. It also released on the PlayStation Portable, but I'll get to that later. Now, Red Hot Rumble is pretty interesting in its own right, as it's a fighting game, but I don't really know how much canon it takes place in the Viewtiful Joe universe. All I can generally say, it definitely takes place after Viewtiful Joe 2, so my personal guess at the ending of the game is they didn't find the threat and just went home. Heck, even the plot itself is pretty simple as it is, like if the series was its own OVA, as Captain Blue is trying to hold a competition to make his next big hero movie, and everyone wants to be the star for this big role, including the 2 original characters in this series, Captain Blue Jr. and Sprocket, who are also playable characters. Not only that, you can also play as Joe, Sylvia, or as she's known in her hero form, Sexy Sylvia, though in the English version it's actually Stylish Sylvia in the anime. You can also play as Blue, Jet, Hulk Davidson, Grand Bruce, Charles III, and of course my favorite character, Alistair. There are tons of other hidden characters, but I'll get to that later. And as you can tell from the multitude of playable characters, yep, this is a fighting game. And it plays somewhat similarly to the Viewtiful Joe series, with a twist. The controls themselves are surprisingly similar to Viewtiful Joe, you know, punches, kicks, special attacks, and it's a platform fighter, like, well, Super Smash Bros. However, unlike Super Smash Bros. Competitive gameplay, the best way I can say about the gameplay in this game, it's as chaotic as Mario Party. That's because the game itself is not really a fighting game, it's a party game. You are allowed to beat up your opponents, but in the end, if you score the most points, depending on how many points you take from your opponents, how many points you do for super moves, and the amalgamations of missions that are in this game, such as going through rings, defeat your opponents, defeat the boss. As long as you have a high enough score, you'll win automatically. However, you don't even have to beat specific missions, all you have to do is just survive some of them. But if you really want to beat the game to 100%, you have to beat these certain missions, which can be a hassle. But I think that's a positive for the replayability. Though my general negatives for the game is the fact that there's not much of a story structure unlike the other games. I mean, it's still got more story than Balan Wonderworld at least. Of course, you are given a chance to unlock tons of new characters. As it may not look it from my playthrough, there are tons of other playable characters, and by tons, I mean alternate outfits for Joe and the gang, as you also unlock the default versions of the original teams. My best recommendation is you have to play as either the two most broken characters in this game. Who are they, you ask? Well, they're Captain Blue Jr. and Jet Black, because their hitboxes for some reason are borderline broken. You can literally keep spamming their attacks and you will get a lot of damage out easily. I hate fighting these characters, and there's a specific mission where you fight both Blue Jr. and Jet Black, and I had to actually use Blue Jr. to actually beat Blue Jr. And to those competitive Red Hot Rumble fans out there, if they exist, is there a tier list? I'd love to know. But there is one more thing I should mention before I give my final thoughts on the game, is the fact that there is a PlayStation Portable version, which actually has more content than the GameCube version, which is surprising. What I mean is there are bonus costumes for characters, such as a secret character I'll get to much later in the video, but you can also unlock not just Dante from Devil May Cry, but also Trish from Devil May Cry as playable characters. It just goes to show you that Sony gets the better version, but then again, Clover were the people also behind the Devil May Cry series. Though it's hard to tell how much control Team Viewtiful had for these other two games, as Red Hot Rumble is a fun, crazy Smash clone that is over-the-top chaotic and a good time with friends, but if you're looking for something competitive, this is not for you. And I haven't found a way to actually change the rule sets of the game so they can be a little more on the competitive side, so sorry. And with that, we are down to the last Viewtiful Joe game in the series. And of all the consoles that actually hold the last Joe game, it's the DS. Yeah, I bet you didn't know this one existed. You know, unless you're a hardcore Viewtiful Joe fan. Or you watched X Play like I did. Releasing on November 2nd of 2005, the last Viewtiful Joe game, Viewtiful Joe Double Trouble. Of course, made again by Capcom and Clover Studios. And there's a good reason why it's the last one, but I'll first explain the story. This time around, the story actually takes place in the real world, as it's shown a certain character is being attacked by Hulk Davidson, but it turns out to be just the set of the movie, and Joe doesn't realize it, even though he's in the real world now, where he has no VFX energy. Again, just like my thoughts on Red Hot Rumble, they probably didn't find threat number 3 and decided just to go home. With this new set actually taking place, the new Captain Blue movie with the new lead actress, Jasmine, who is Joe's sister. I find it funny that Joe's entire family's name all start with the letter J. You have Joe, you got Jet, and you got Jasmine. However, the film has been stolen by another new group known as the Motto Empire. And Joe decides to stop them even though he has no VFX energy. However, Captain Blue makes a new camera that allows Joe to use VFX energy in the real world, so there's a lot of continuity problems there. Now, Joe can use VFX energy in the real world just like he did last time in the final boss of the second game. However, Jasmine also decides to follow you even though you only get one level where she's playable, and I don't have footage for that because I don't have a DS capture, so I'm just using my phone to capture the footage of the DS game. I will give Capcom credit that they actually managed to make a Viewtiful Joe game work on the Nintendo DS, and yeah, it doesn't. I should probably explain why because of the controls. It does play like the main game. X and Y uses for punches and kicks, and of course you have the slow ability. You also still have the zoom ability. The problem is the newer abilities and zoom are both controlled with the stylus. Yes, they have forced touchscreen controls and they do not work most of the time. Slow is still the one I constantly use for certain situations, but another problem I'll get to later once I tell you about the new abilities. Zoom, you have to slide the stylus down and up so it has like a forced zoom in attack so you can use certain abilities, just like in the original game. However, the new touchscreen abilities are split, where you can actually split the screen in half, and actually I really like this ability, probably one of my favorites next to slow, as it does have a lot of uses including better platforming, but I will generally say the second ability that replaces Mach Speed, which is not in this game, is the worst one in the entire series, period. I'm referring to the ability Scratch. So how does this one work? Well, you press the R button and then use the touchscreen and stylus and you shake it like crazy on a target to hopefully do an attack on them. I don't know why it does not work most of the time. And I really hate missions that have to make you use Scratch, because it is obnoxious to use, I really hate using it, and this game does not work with touchscreen controls. It's a fast-paced action platformer that doesn't even control well. Hell, there's actually a lot of problems with the game I generally had more than the last two. For instance, Joe's jumping is actually a lot more heavier, and I've had a harder time platforming in this game than I ever had with any other games, even Red Hot Rumble. Not to mention, I feel like the VFX energy drains so much faster than the original game. And I feel like it even burns even more fast when you use multitudes of abilities. This happens so much to the point where I stopped kind of using a lot of my VFX energy until I got more of it for later on in levels. Which is disappointing, because when it came to Viewtiful Joe's 1 and 2, and even Red Hot Rumble, I still had tons of fun playing the games, even though I was generally frustrated. And as per usual, I was playing in kids mode, but for the first time in the series, it definitely felt like I was playing a kids mode. I died only once in the entire game. I am not joking when I say that, because that's how easy it was. And somehow it even has less rewards than in Viewtiful Joe 2. I did mention you can play as Jasmine in a singular world, but sadly you can't even unlock her as a playable character in this game. In fact, the only thing you actually unlock in this game is V-rated mode. That's it. And I'm just gonna basically spoil the game for you because honestly, I don't recommend playing this one. The Motto Empire is planning on stealing the heroic energy of heroes, which are references to other classical films and other types of media such as RoboCop, Edward Scissorhands, which was actually surprising to me, and another short-lived Alistair story arc. But it's also revealed that the final boss is actually Joe and Jasmine's mother, who apparently was a great actress but sadly died a long time ago. Must have happened during the time when Jet found the black film and turned evil. So again, continuity problems. However, her stay wasn't long as she was only allowed to stay in the real world for at least a day. It's also revealed that Joe was secretly dating other girls besides Sylvia, so Joe's kind of a scumbag. I don't know how much Clover Studio or Hideki Kamiya was in charge of these games, but it definitely doesn't feel like Viewtiful Joe, which is why I consider Double Trouble to be the worst of the Joe series. Joe is incredibly heavy, with his platforming, which is not good. The new VFX abilities I rarely use because I found them more of a hindrance than a way to navigate through the levels, especially when you have special enemies that you can only defeat by using the touchscreen, and the fact that the story doesn't really feel like a Viewtiful Joe game, especially in the continuity. And I don't consider the Motto Empire threat number 3 in the main series, hence why I was kind of curious if there ever was going to be a Viewtiful Joe 3. But sadly, that never happened. Eventually, Clover Studios was no longer a company that made games for Capcom, not after the disasters like Double Trouble and another game known as God Hand. Whatever happened to Clover Studios, you may ask? Well, if you haven't guessed yet, with names like Kamiya and references to Bayonetta and the Wonderful 101, Hideki Kamiya and his crew of Clover Studios eventually made a new company known as Platinum Games. And yes, they have been thriving since they left, with tons of really great games. It's kind of sad to see that Viewtiful Joe gets not that much recognition nowadays with a few cameos. I'll generally say it's still more than what Power Stone gets, but it may not be the end for Viewtiful Joe. Right now, Capcom has had a major resurgence of a lot of their old school games. Mega Man 11, Devil May Cry 5, Ghosts and Goblins, Resurrection. Not to mention tons of Capcom games are now coming on the Nintendo Switch, with most, if not almost all, the Mega Man games on the Nintendo Switch, with the exclusion of these Mega Man franchises, and of course another port of Okami on there. Maybe Viewtiful Joe could get a port on the Nintendo Switch maybe, or even be multi-platform. Though if my recommendation, I'd recommend porting the PlayStation 2 version, and eventually conclude the series with the long-awaited Viewtiful Joe 3. Though my best recommendation, if you want to do a third and final Viewtiful Joe Capcom, get Platinum back, get Hideki Kamiya back. In fact, I'd love to see if the fans of the Viewtiful Joe series would love to see Joe come back. So I want to do a little experiment. I want this hashtag to spread. Hashtag Spread that to Capcom, spread that to Platinum, and of course, spread that to Hideki Kamiya, if he hasn't blocked you yet. I still say there is a future for Viewtiful Joe, or at least a proper conclusion. I mean, if some games that we've been waiting forever eventually get a third and final game, I think it's possible for Joe to still get a future. With that said, that is all of the Viewtiful Joe games. Thank you so much for watching, and of course, Henshin a go-go, baby! Huh? Is it me or is the static a little louder than normal? Huh, my old backdrop. I guess we're using this from now on, I guess? Well, this is weird.